Today, I just wanted to capture a thought about this issue about the unvaccinated, the undervaccinated, and the vaccinated issue. And I realize that people don't seem to quite grasp what the differences are. So I'll explain what I'm talking about. Unvaccinated means that you have never had a COVID vaccine. Okay, that's the unvaccinated cohort. Undervaccinated means that you could have had even one vaccine, or you've had two vaccines and you haven't had your boosters, or you've had your boosters, but you're not up to date with your boosters. And then you had the vaccinated cohort who are up to date with their CDC recommended boosters at this current time. And just so that you are aware, when it comes to the recommendations here, staying up to date with your COVID 19 vaccines, as of the 23rd of October, it's for people 65 years and older and for people who are moderately to severely immunocompromised. Additionally, they make it clear that, as it says here, if you are aged 65 and older or at high risk for severe COVID 19 or have never received a COVID vaccine. So, in a sense, they haven't quite put this as differentiated the way that I did. And that's okay because we're not necessarily always all in agreement. But I'm explaining to you what it is that I am looking for when I speak about these cohorts. And everything for me is about pushing for autopsies. And there's a reason why I want us to push for autopsies is because if we don't, we won't understand these issues properly. So, what I'm going to show you quickly is the piece of research that I did. And so, let's just be clear, I'm not a statistician, I'm a clinician. And I did some research trying to figure out this issue at least 2 years ago. Okay. And I saw a pattern then that concerned me very much. And I raised awareness about it at the time. I'm not sure if it got much attention, but I think now that we're having increased excess deaths, is very, very important for us to reflect on what that means. So this is what I did is that I took data from the Office of National Statistics in the UK and I looked at the number of people multiplied by the time spent in vaccination status, first dose greater than 21 days by age group. And what I did is that you can see in blue was 18 to 39, 40 to 49, 50 to 59, all the different age groups. And what I noticed that between June and December of 2022, it was largely stable. And so what it meant is that whoever this was that took one vaccine, this percentage or this proportion didn't really change much. They didn't go on to have a second one. And this was the same here with regards to the different age groups. So I recognize that at this point here, there was some stability with regards to the vaccination status. So then I took this period of time, just June 22 to December 22, to look a little bit more closely. And when I looked at deaths involving COVID 19 by vaccination status, what we noticed that so from June 2022 across the line, December 2022, and you can see in red is a first dose, purple is unvaccinated, green is second dose, dark blue is ever vaccinated. That means everyone who's ever had a vaccine, and light blue is the third booster dose. And so you can see that it gives the impression here that if you have ever been vaccinated or boosted, you are protected compared to the unvaccinated. And in December 22, June to December 22, the Omicron was still circulating. There are still people who are high risk who weren't vaccinated. I could see how that fit. Interestingly, the second dose, if you had a second dose and it was beyond 6 months, there wasn't any significant protection compared to being unvaccinated. And what was quite remarkable is that if they only had one dose over 21 days, it seemed as though their risk for COVID was higher than even the unvaccinated. Really, really important stuff. And I think that it's critical for us to try and understand what does that mean. And as I said, I was just looking at the data to try and make sense of it. The other piece of data that I had found at that time was essentially looking now at non-COVID or all-cause mortality. What all-cause mortality is looking at is that it's almost as if when you are using a new drug, it may be there to treat liver disease, and you're looking for complications with liver disease, but you don't know if that new drug could be also causing strokes. And so, if you don't look at all cause mortality, you may miss a trend that could be relevant. And so, all cause mortality is extremely important in trying to understand exactly what's going on. So when we look at non-COVID deaths now, so this is now looking at the first one was COVID deaths. The second one now is all the other people who died not outside of COVID. So it's closer to all cause mortality, but it broke it by vaccination status from June 22 to December 2022. And as usual in purple here is the unvaccinated. And below that, the ever vaccinated and the third booster dose seem to have a protective effect. But here's the problem: the second dose, greater than 6 months, and the first dose, greater than 21 days, have a significantly higher risk of non COVID mortality. Now, this is really, really important because my point is that excess deaths are up 2.5% in the UK, 3% in the US, and we don't know the reason. We don't know who is dying. But this flags to the fact that potentially there is something going on in these groups. Now, I don't know what it is, and I don't think that this is necessarily, as I said, I'm not a statistician. And when I compared this to data from the Heart Group, which did a similar kind of analysis, they found a very similar pattern. And so they were looking as well at all cause mortality by vaccination status, again using the similar data all the way from December 2022 from January 2022 to December 2022. And again, the third dose or booster was down here at about 1,000 and relatively flat, slightly coming up. And then you see the unvaccinated line here is in black coming right down as people who were at risk either had severe COVID with natural immunity or they may have died. And it's coming right down to being about in line with the vaccinated and boosted. But these other lines here are now very important because first dose, as I said, less than 21 days, is up here. There's this one here actually. Second dose, less than 21 days, is up here. And you can see suddenly all these other lines for people who are what I would call under vaccinated seem to be at risk, not necessarily for COVID, but also for significant other non COVID mortality. Now, as I said, this was there, this evidence was there from 2022. There was something that was not right, and it needed to be investigated. And we desperately need public health to not take a political or a financial stance and really try and clarify exactly what is happening. Because my thought, when I broke it down further, and you can see it here again, I just took the three groups: the unvaccinated, second dose, and first dose. Unvaccinated at about a little over 1,000, and this is age standardized mortality rate per 100,000 person years. At 1,500, so 1.5 times is the second dose, and going up to 1,800 to 2,000 is the first dose. This is not right. And so, what we don't know is, did people who had the first dose and had an adverse reaction and therefore not have the second dose, are they at increased risk? Did people who had the second dose and had adverse reactions not taking the booster doses, are they at higher risk? And this is the kind of analysis that is needed. And it's not just about the fact that they are at high risk, but we also want to understand, if people died, what was the mechanism? What was the pathology? As I said, I'm looking for perivascular inflammation, I'm looking for vasculitis. But without autopsy, we are blind. I think that, as I said, I'm happy for anybody to give a really good explanation as to why this kind of research is not being done. If the pandemic was past and excess deaths were at baseline and there was no concern, maybe you could understand. But even then, you should want to understand what was done and the impact. But for us to still have excess deaths, people still to be getting sick, and as I showed you, remember, look again at the image here, there is something that is not right here that I can't fully explain, and we need to understand what in the world is happening with this group of people that seems to be putting them at higher risk, much higher risk, it seems, than the unvaccinated. These are serious questions, no easy answers. And I think that until the public starts to really push the politicians, because at the moment they can get away with it because nobody's interested, nobody wants to know. And as such, they're not realizing that in effect, you're creating a potential issue down the line that will be harder to mitigate. I'll keep you updated onto these facts and keep watching as we try and dig through the science. Have a great evening.